Have you ever been in this situation? You show up to a friend's birthday party with your shiny new camera because you're the photo person now. You snap a quick photo of your friends, you look at the screen but it's a hot blurry mess, or maybe the sky is completely blown out and white. And you're stuck there thinking to yourself, why does my phone take way better photos than my brand new camera does? Well, here's the thing, your camera is only as smart as the settings that you give it. And your camera has no idea what you're shooting, what's in your scene, or what look you're trying to go for. So today I'm cracking open the mode dial all the way from auto, aperture priority, and then up to manual to show you what each mode does, when you should be using them, and why. And don't worry, I won't make this one too complex. I want to make it easy and simple for you to understand. I promise your brand new camera is a much more powerful tool than your phone, but it just can't read your mind. If we haven't met yet, my name is Mike and I'm an official Nikon creator and photography educator based here in Australia. Over the past 2 years, I've helped millions of people understand photography with my daily videos on Instagram and TikTok. But this year I'm jumping onto YouTube because I think it's finally time that I started diving a little bit deeper into my photography explainers and helping people just like you finally understand photography. Okay, let's start where most people do. Auto mode. It's the big green camera, or maybe it just says auto in bold capital letters like it's yelling at you. Either way, that's the default. In auto mode, your camera chooses everything for you. Aperture, shutter speed, ISO, your white balance, your focusing modes, any different setting in your camera. If it's in auto mode, your camera will choose it for you. You normally don't change anything when you're in auto mode except for your exposure compensation. And if you don't know what that is, go back and check out this video. Honestly, auto mode isn't a bad thing when you're just starting out. It's great for a few quick snaps if you don't want to have to think about what your camera is doing. But here's the problem. Your camera doesn't know what you're trying to do. Like for example, you might be trying to shoot a portrait, but your camera doesn't know that you want the background to be blurry. So it might stop the aperture down to something like f8 to try to keep everything nice and sharp. Or maybe you're indoors and it's a little bit dark, and instead of your camera raising the ISO and lowering the shutter speed to let in more light, it just pops up the flash and fires it in your friend's face, which totally kills the mood. Or maybe the classic example, you're at a park trying to take photos of dogs running across the field, you press your shutter button and the camera tries to pick a shutter speed for you, but then you look at it and the dog's all blurry. That's because your camera didn't know that you were trying to stop that motion. Again, in auto mode, you give up that control for speed and simplicity, and sometimes that's fine. But if you want your photos to look intentional and nail your exposure across all of your shots, then you need to step away from auto mode. And don't worry, the next few modes are the perfect stepping stone for you. Let's talk about program mode, or the P on your dial. Not to be confused with professional mode, which is what I thought it stood for when I first started photography. Program mode is like auto mode's more flexible cousin. The camera still picks your shutter speed and your aperture, but you get to set things like your ISO, your white balance, and your focusing modes. It's a nice stepping stone if you want to dip your toes into a little bit of creativity without diving in head first. And you can even change the combination of aperture and shutter speed that your camera chooses. So if you don't like what your camera chose, just turn the rear dial and it will give you a different combination of shutter speed and aperture. Remember my video on stops of light. If one goes up, the other one must come down, and your camera is just doing that automatically as you scroll the wheel. It's a really powerful tool and not many people know about program mode or even what it does. Unfortunately though, because program mode does choose the aperture and the shutter speed for you, it's not really teaching you anything about what those settings do. So if you're serious about photography, I'd just skip over program mode and go on to one of the next modes I'm going to talk about. Alrighty, this is where things start to get a little bit fun. Aperture Priority mode is abbreviated as A for aperture on Nikon and Sony cameras, or AV for aperture variable on Canon cameras. In this mode, you get to control one of the most creative elements of your camera, and that's aperture, just determining how wide or how narrow the lens opening is. Remember, if you open your aperture opening, more light comes in, and if you close it down, less light comes in. It's also important to note that aperture is given as a fraction, so remember it's not f2.8, it's f over 2.8. So as the aperture number gets bigger, your lens opening is actually getting smaller. The other effect that your aperture has is on depth of field. A really small aperture number like f1.4 will give you a really blurry background, and a large aperture number like f16 will put your background all in focus. So in Aperture Priority, you pick everything, including the aperture, and the camera will choose the shutter speed to give you a good exposure. So in Aperture Priority, you can dial in something like f2.8 to always give you a nice blurry background, and then no matter where you aim, your camera will determine a shutter speed for you. Or you might be shooting a landscape and you want everything to be in focus, so you set your aperture to f8 or f11, and then your camera will pick a shutter speed for you. The real beauty is that you decide how much you want to be in focus, and then your camera takes care of the rest of it for you. Just a quick heads up though, because your camera is choosing your shutter speed, you will have to keep an eye on it. Sometimes if it gets too dark, your shutter speed will drop too low and your hands can start to shake and cause your images to be blurry. A hot tip is that your shutter speed should always be greater than 1 over your focal length. So if you're shooting on a 35mm lens, your shutter speed should always be faster than 1/35 of a second. If you're shooting on a 200mm lens, your shutter speed should always be faster than 1/200th of a second. In aperture priority mode though, if your shutter speed ever gets too low, just bump up your ISO a little bit. Next we have shutter priority, which is exactly the opposite of aperture priority. Shutter priority is abbreviated as S for shutter on Nikon and Sony cameras, but TV for time variable on Canon cameras because Canon are weird and they just have to be different. In shutter priority, you pick the shutter speed and then your camera will choose an aperture for you to balance out the exposure. Shutter priority is perfect for whenever there's action involved in a scene that you're trying to photograph. Let's say for example you're photographing sports or dancers or cars or your kids are running around in the backyard. Your goal is normally to freeze that motion, so you want to set your shutter speed to something like 1/500th of a second or 1/1000th of a second to make sure they're not blurring through the frame. Or on the flip side, say you want to capture some motion of something but you want to give it a bit of a slow shutter. Like you might be photographing a waterfall or some star trails or people walking past the frame. In that sense, you might slow your shutter speed down to 1/10th of a second, half a second, or even open it up for a full 10 seconds. For any of these scenarios, shutter priority is great because it gives you full control over what the shutter speed should be, and then your camera will pick an aperture for you. The only issue here is when there's not enough light. For example, when your aperture can't open wide enough to accommodate for the shutter speed that you've chosen. You might see your aperture number blinking in the viewfinder or on the screen, and that's your camera yelling at you, telling you that you need more light. So just be aware that shutter priority is amazing for capturing action, but if you're in low light, you may need to increase your ISO. Alrighty, let's talk about the one that sounds really scary, but actually I want to show you how easy it is. I'm talking of course about manual mode, and this is where you set everything yourself inside of your camera. You choose the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO, the white balance, the autofocusing mode. Your camera does nothing in this mode. Now, if that sounds too overwhelming for you, I get it. Manual mode used to stress me out as well, and you can definitely start on one of the earlier modes that I talked about. But once you understand it, it'll give you full control over your creativity in your photography. So when do I use manual mode? Well, I use it any time that I want to have consistency across my photographs. Let's say I'm photographing a wedding ceremony indoors, in a church for example. The lighting is the same everywhere and it's constant, so I can just set my settings and no matter where I turn to take a photo, the lighting will be the same. The last thing that I want in that scenario is my camera changing the settings for me between every single photo, so that when I pull up a gallery of images, some are bright, some are dark, they're all over the place. In manual mode, I can lock in my settings once and just know wherever I take a photo, they're all going to come out the same. Or if I'm doing flash photography, for example, it's so important to use manual mode because I want the settings to stay the same so I can change my flash power and keep everything constant. Basically, manual mode is great for whenever I'm taking multiple photos and the light isn't changing. I know that I can just set my settings and forget about them and focus more on the creativity. But with great power comes great responsibility. Manual mode definitely gives you more chances to stuff it up. Like taking photos indoors and setting your ISO to 2000 and then you walk outside and forget that your ISO was on 2000, you increase your shutter speed but all your photos are grainy and you're wondering why. We've all been there, done that. It's easy to forget to change your settings when you're changing lighting conditions. Or maybe you had your camera sitting on a tripod, so you had your shutter speed nice and low because it was locked off on a tripod, but then you took it off and started taking some photos and now they're all blurry because you were taking photos at 1/10 of a second. So when you're shooting in manual mode, you've got to stay alert because you've got to keep changing your settings every time the lighting changes. Just be sure to check your histogram, use your light meter, and don't trust what it tells you on the back of the screen. Let's talk about scene modes. You know the little icons that look like a mountain or a flower or a person running? What do they do? Well, most people just ignore them and some cameras don't even have them, but I wanted to address them here in case your camera does, like this one that I'm using right now. The one that looks like a person is normally portrait mode, and that basically tells your camera to blur the background, so lower your aperture as far as it can go. The one with the person running is sports mode, so it turns your shutter speed up to capture that motion. The one with the stars is night mode, and it just boosts your ISO up and slows your shutter speed down down to capture the night sky. Or you may see a flower, which is normally macro mode. This is telling your camera to switch into a close autofocus mode because everything you're taking photos of is going to be really close up. In all these modes, it's basically the camera saying, I think I know what you're taking a photo of here, let me try to dial in the settings for you. They are a really decent starting point if you don't like having to think about what your settings should be, but once you understand aperture and shutter speed and ISO, you'll stop using these modes very quickly. I like to think of scene modes as really early training wheels. You can use them when you're first starting, but you'll quickly move off them onto something else. Unless your camera has a scene mode for perfect skin tones in bad lighting, in which case I want to hear about it. Quick bonus tip, this is one of my favorite hacks for shooting fast but still getting a lot of creative control. At weddings, I love to use Aperture Priority paired with Auto ISO. Here's the deal, in Aperture Priority, you pick the aperture and then your camera will choose the shutter speed for you. So if your light's constantly changing, that's really helpful for run and gun photography. But what if your shutter speed drops too low? Well, I still want to be able to capture the motion. I want to tell my camera that I don't want my shutter speed going too low. So I turn on Auto ISO, and as soon as the shutter speed starts to get too low, the ISO will start increasing to equal out the exposure. And if your camera lets you, you can even set the parameters. Like I can say that I don't want my shutter speed going below 1/100th of a second. And I don't want my ISO going above 5,000. So if I'm taking photos in the afternoon around sunset and it's starting to get pretty dark, my shutter speed will keep coming down until it hits 1/100th of a second, at which point my ISO will then start to raise. So the shutter speed doesn't drop too low that my hands are shaky and the images are blurry. I love using this mode at weddings all the time because you can be taking photos inside a church at a wedding ceremony, but then the couple is going to walk outside into the sun. So you've got to be changing your camera settings quicker than you can keep up with. Or there might be a situation at a wedding ceremony where some people are standing in bright hot lights and other people are over the other side in the darkness. I can't keep changing settings between them and still capture candid moments. Remember, there is nothing wrong with letting your camera do the work for you so that you can focus on being creative in your posing and your lighting. Aperture Priority plus Auto ISO. Try it out. So after all that, which mode should you actually use? Well, here's the cheat sheet for you. Auto mode, you can use it if you just want to grab a quick photo and you don't really care much about the result. Program mode is great if you want a little bit of flexibility, but you don't want to have to think too hard about your settings. Aperture Priority is great for anything stationary like portraits because you can set the aperture and how much background blur to give. Shutter Priority is best when the subject is moving and you want to capture that motion. You can set your shutter speed and let the camera do the rest. And then finally, manual mode is best when you want total control over your photography, especially when you're in fixed lighting conditions and you want consistency throughout a gallery. If you're just getting off auto mode, consider switching over to Aperture Priority. It'll help you understand what the aperture and the shutter speed do hand in hand. And if you've been on Aperture Priority for a while, consider switching on Auto ISO and see how that plays and helps you become more creative as a photographer. And if you want to change your exposure in Aperture Priority, check out this video on exposure compensation. It's one of those buttons hidden in plain sight, but it actually does a lot for your exposure. But before you go, let me know in the comments which mode do you mostly use on your camera. For me, I'm normally in manual mode, but Aperture Priority sometimes if the lighting conditions are changing. If this video helped you at all, hit that like button and maybe send this video around to someone else who's stuck on auto mode. But thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next week.